Right. Well, firstly, I must thank Jill for the opportunity to be able to talk about the Argus project, which has dogged my life for some 32 years since Chernobyl, as I think the subject has so many here. The one thing that I wanted, well, three things that I want to talk about. Now, if I can get the right buttons on this, I want to talk a bit about how it came to be that we set up the Argus project in the first place, and then I want to talk about what we've arrived at in terms of the online website and facility, the tool which is there for others to use, freely use, and just to consider possibilities for the future, including what I'm loosely talking about as a pod for monitoring gamma radiation, and it as a portable and reasonably high resolution device. Now, I've chosen this slide because it came as rather a shock to me when I saw it, and quite fascinated by it as an image. But it sums up, I think, our feelings as families at the time in 1986, the very day that we heard about the event in Chernobyl, when I was working on a film, which was my background in film production and its technology, and I'd heard that from the producer we were making a film about open cast coal mining in Durham. And he got out of the car, we'd been on a convoy to another location, and he said, "Have you heard the news? There's been a nuclear reactor exploded in Russia behind the Iron Curtain." And he was getting news by the half hour. It so turned out that he was involved in the Druridge Bay campaign, and they had a radiation monitor, a Geiger counter called a Mini 680, that they'd been provided for by the union that produced the turbines for nuclear power stations, and they were monitoring under John's oversight the gardens of people in the region who were concerned that there might be a nuclear power station built in Druridge Bay. And there was certainly talk of it and a lot of concern as to where it may have been at that time. That very night that we heard about it, myself and a couple of concerned friends as well, who also had children on the way, as did I and my partner then, we headed off to find this Geiger counter, as he was the producer of the company. This film happened to be the chairman of that campaign. And we looked at the Geiger counter, we headed up into Northumberland, we found the Geiger counter. John had given them advice on how to use it that week as the news was coming in, to record daily, not just people's gardens, to find out the baseline for future possible increases if the nuclear power station were to be built, and to oversee any danger that might have occurred from that. And he'd instructed them to take daily readings at the same time every night for the following, well, weeks to come. And we watched those readings, and through that week, on the Saturday, we saw the background readings go up by 80%. And they stayed that high for an entire month. Well, they dropped back a bit after a couple of weeks, and we kept looking at the readings, and then eventually they dropped down to the baseline as the contamination was washed into the ground. Now, none of us who were watching those readings at that time really understood anything about radiation. I had a minimal understanding of it because as a kid I was taken up to Harrods. I lived in Kent, and I was told by my father, "Don't put your feet under the pedescopes," as exciting as it was, because you could see your bones in your feet and you could see the fit of your shoes. He said, "If you do that, the hairs in your legs will fall out." So that was rather an alarming experience. Now we're talking about. Are you going to show us your non-hairy legs? Well, I don't have very hairy legs. It was in the 50s, and The other, well, the situation then occurred where the three of us that grouped together, we said, look, we looked at, we were at the place where the Mini 680 radiation monitor was located, looking at the readings and so on, and I happened to open the manual for it, and looking at the end of it, I saw a circuit diagram. And my interest in Geiger counters was rather peculiar, because when I was about 10 or 11 years old, I remember going up to London, getting a Geiger tube, a Geiger Muller tube, and bringing it home because I'd read in a wireless world, I'd seen a discussion about building a Geiger counter using one of these tubes, and I thought, looking at the diagram, from that past experience of trying to build a Geiger counter, which fortunately I didn't succeed in doing, because on reflection my father certainly didn't advise me anything, but he didn't realise I could have killed myself with the voltages that it was developing, the way it was being built. It didn't work. But at the time of looking at the diagram, when we were looking at the Geiger counter, I'm thinking to myself, we could build that. And so we set out to do it. And I managed to get together the components. We bought one of the probes from Mini Instruments, who built that Geiger counter in question. We got a little coil which enabled us to develop the necessary voltages, and there it was, a working Geiger counter, a bit crude in the way it was assembled in a box and so on. But it gave us an idea that we ought to put this information we were seeing, these readings, up on a big building and let everybody see it. And I think the wisdom of John's advice was, you cannot do that. You cannot just put this information out there. We even had a building in mind where we were going to put large numerals up, illuminated numerals. But he said, you've got to have more than one. And sure enough, we set out to try and build another one, but we could not even afford a computer or anything that we could use to connect these things together to be able to know what was going on between them, in order to get them in different locations. And we got to the point where I met somebody at the university where I was teaching. I was teaching in the arts field, in a college of art, essentially, but I had the good fortune of being able to go into the canteen and talk to various scientists and engineers, and I was introduced to a man who had said, well, let's talk about what you'd need to do this. And then gradually, as we were talking about it more, he said, hang on a minute, to keep my name out of this, I don't want to have any, I'm not sure my wife would be too happy about me doing this, and I don't want my brake pipes cut, because there was so much suspicion about the fact that we were trying to look at nuclear radiation in the environment, that we were dealing with people in the background who might be the military or the nuclear industry, and he was very apprehensive about this, but he was brilliant at designing electronic equipment. And I had the interest in electronics. We spent 3 months together, because we couldn't afford to buy a BBC Micro, designing a computer from scratch. And once he'd done that, suddenly I thought, well, I'm going to have to build this damn thing. So I set about etching circuit boards, laying out the acetates with all the tracks on it and so on. And in the end, succeeded in building the components, putting them into a box, and thinking, well, what's it going to do? There was no program, there was nothing for it. At which point, a colleague who was a programmer, one of the three of us, set about trying to write a program to burn a little chip to plug into it, and he came round one night with his chip. He said, okay, let's plug that in, and you're sort of looking at it, you press the button, you turn the power on, you press the button, nothing happened. Absolutely nothing happened. And you think, well, what do you do now? It's a box of bits and we don't know anything about it, apart from the fact it should do something. And then he called me from the other room and he said, it did something, it did something. And I said, well, what's that? He said it turned one of the little lights on the front, because I put 2 LEDs on it. And I'm sort of thinking, well, really? I mean, he said, yes, that's what it was meant to do. That's it, it's working. And it was the birth of a computer. It was an amazing experience, actually, on reflection, because in those days, it was quite something to try and put together a computer. It worked essentially first time. He made one little mistake, and it was to do with the reset button. After 3 months' work and the building of the components, etching the circuit boards, drilling the holes, soldering in the components and so on. And then we had to write a program for it. My colleague, he wrote a program for it to work with modems, which then, equivalent I guess to routers these days, worked at 300 bits per second. Now we're talking about 20 megabits, 60 megabits. It's totally different. The whole thing was pretty difficult to deal with. But when I mean, the thing was, we bought a modem. It cost 400 quid at the time. We could hardly afford that, so it was I was working on sound jobs on films and so on, so I managed to plough a bit of money in here and there. But the thing was, I started to think back to when I was about 7, when I remember having tubs in the fridge. We used to have tubs of condensed milk, and we lived in Kent, and I learnt from my mother that my father had actually given a talk to the parents of the school that I was at, the infant school that I was at, about the dangers of eating fresh vegetables. Now, he worked in the Ministry of Information at the time. He knew something other people didn't know, but he could talk about the dangers of radioactive material. And this is probably why he was telling me not to put my feet under pedescopes. So anyway, we eventually decided we got these different machines working. Reading bought one, and fortunately, and so grateful, Sally and her husband had bought one that we put in oh God, I forgot the name of the lock. Holy Lock. With this nuclear submarine in front of us. There's a certain nervousness about the fact we were looking around. Now, where we put this, we look to see who's looking at us and so on and so forth. But we did. We got it running there, and her son, at about 7 years old, climbed underneath the floorboards to actually get a cable out to the garden, because the one thing that I'd found out was from the National Physical Laboratory back in the early 1980s, they set out a standard by which you should be monitoring the background gamma radiation levels, and you should be doing that. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a physicist, I knew nothing about this at the time, that you need to be able to isolate the readings from the beta if you're aiming at the gamma, and you need to set it about 1.5 meters above the ground, and ideally with the largest tube that you could use, which was practically available and economically available. And that was, in fact, the very same tube that we bought from for the initial design, and it was also the same tube that the government radiation network, which eventually came about after ours started in the early 90s, had been using. Unfortunately, all the tubes we ever bought, sadly for the people who'd got the stations in time, at that time, all failed. They were a British manufacturer. They went from one manufacturer to another manufacturer. They got more and more expensive. Every single one of them failed within either minutes, hours, or days and even years. They all failed. However, we did move to, in 1996, we used tubes that came from America, from a company called LND, and not one of them has failed once we got past the first hurdles. And they worked ever since, and I believe there are probes out there that could still be deployed of that type that otherwise have fallen by the wayside. Now I want to show you what we've now arrived at in terms of presenting the data, because in the early days we set up a bulletin board system where people could log in, but nobody really knew how to do it. They didn't even understand what modems were, I found. And local authorities, one or two of them, were quite enthusiastic about the idea. Reading bought a station, and they were constantly looking at the data and phoning me up every other day. Anyway, what we've arrived at now, if I can move forward, let's find the right buttons, is that, well, by the time we'd built several of these stations, and by 1989, we had so many people had become involved in helping with the project that we felt morally obliged to respect their input and wanted to have some way of consolidating our thinking behind the project at that point in time. And these were the objects of a trust which a lawyer who I found at the university, well, the Polytechnic that I was working at the time, sort of offered to write up for us. And it took several weeks before we finally came up with this, where everybody came together at a meeting at my house, and this is what we arrived at. And I think it's relatively clear. We set out the idea that we had to sort of bring all the data together from all the different stations that we were building and to archive that data and in a scientific way provide the ability to provide the methodology of collection to be available for everyone, and also to set out to try and disseminate the data for others to use, and not to undertake any license that threatened any of those objects of the trust. But one thing that did get written into it, which I think is extremely important, is that while we ourselves might have been, in some respects, activists in this whole arena, we felt that we weren't in a position to make any judgments of this data. It's for others to be able to do that, and so this was written in as a very important clause to the project's, well, the trust's objects. Now I'm going to just give a very quick rundown. Here's the order of events that the project went through, and you can see the date at which the trust was formed. And I can say the very year that we started the project was the year, of course, of Chernobyl, and it was the first low-level radiation and health conference that we attended. And I remember only too well standing up and there was about 200 people there, if I remember, and I picked the microphone up, well, I was given the microphone, and nervously I stood in front of everybody and I said, look, we've got this far in monitoring with these stations, but what are the units that we need to use? How do we interpret any of this? What do we do? We knew we had to do something. And anyway, we were advised on this and that. And at a later conference, I turned up, I think it was Norwich. I put a little handout to people to say, well, what sort of name can we give the project? And it was sent to me that we should call it the Argus Project, after the Argus peacock with all the eyes that were forever looking, that they, as I understand the story, he was responsible for looking after the safety or chastity of, was it Io? I don't know the Greek mythology, or if I did, I've forgotten it. And failed, had 50 eyes open, 50 eyes closed, and in the end actually closed all his eyes, fell asleep, and then the eyes that you see on the peacock were where they were all intended to be left open and forever vigilant. So it was a valuable thing. It was the automated radiation gamma something something, and I can't remember what it was. But so that was the birth of the project. And in the 90s we developed a multi-channel monitoring system, not just for gamma. We found the importance of monitoring weather parameters at the same time at the location so that one could determine what the rainfall was, because people were now starting to talk about the relationship, as John has, between the radioactivity in the washout from the rain and the increase in gamma, the onset of the rain being a washout of dust from, particularly in the occluded front situation where there's a lot more activity high up in the atmosphere. So that became very interesting at the time for us, and in the 90s we very ambitiously started to design a remote acid rain monitoring machine that would automatically collect the rain samples and then analyze them, and we would be able to update the system remotely and so on. It did work, but it was too hard to calibrate and it would be too expensive to repeat, and it was a beautiful bit of engineering by one of our members back then. And in the recent years, I can talk about a relationship that we started with Connection Software. I was losing faith in the fact that we couldn't hold the thing together. We had many people involved in the project for so many years, and they went off in their own life to do other things and what have you. They contributed a lot, and many people that I had a server under the stairs. It was hard to keep going. No funds really, apart from a little bit coming in from some councils, because largely speaking, they were council-owned stations, environmental health officers. They moved on, and they often sort of dropped the idea of monitoring. They weren't too keen after the subject ceased to be as sexy as it did in the early days. And then, out of the blue, I had a bit of a guilt thing, because this company's Connection Software, a fellow called John Cole had contacted us in the mid 2000s and said, look, I've seen what you've got online, which was a rather sort of naff a graphing system. He said, look, you need a bit of help. Is there anything I can do to help? It took years before we got to the point where I was absolutely desperate. And he did, when I phoned him up, he'd had a heart attack before then as well. He sort of said, yeah, I'll happily do that. If I can, I've got somebody who might be able to help. And he ended up giving us the support for over a year to build a database system, but no online front end. So it was a bit difficult to use or see what was on it. I asked him if he could help me do a little front end. He said, well, it's costing a bit of money, this. I can't really keep putting these guys onto this. And in the end, I waited months and months. I thought, what can we do now? We hadn't got much money. It turned out that my wife and I, we have an online eBay shop, and she was packing some. We were packing some toothpaste, and she said, "Don't you know somebody called John Cole?" And I said, "Yeah, where from?" He said, "Hatton Garden." She said, "Hatton Garden." I said, "That's the same guy." I felt so guilty because I really hadn't got back to him. So I ended up writing frantically a letter, putting it in with the toothpaste, saying, "Can you help again? We've got some money now from the councils." And sure enough, he phoned me up. He said, "Certainly can." And from that day onwards, we had a very strong relationship. Started to build the ability to see the stations coming and going and be able to sort of maintain them when there were issues. And we ended up then with a situation where we needed a very front end bit for people to see the graphs and be able to play with them. And that's what I want to show you now. Okay, I'll just show you that. These are the people. I've not put their surnames in because a lot of them want to remain anonymous, in fact. But sadly, these have left us now. But these are the people that have been involved in this. You'll see John Cole. John Cole. Seriously. John Cole, can you see John Cole?
No, I don't see him.
Ah, maybe he didn't want to be on there. No, I will add him to it because I've only just put that list together and I'm realising that it's not as complete as I thought. I think there's about 33 or 34 or so. And I'm hoping that there will be others in the future because this new website that we've now got running, it's been going a year or so, but it's only in recent months that it's become a viable thing for people to use as a scientific tool. And that's what I want to show you now. So I'm going to go through it quite quickly. The website, as you see in the background, is the, I'll bring that up now, but just on the basics of it. This is the overall view of the website. You have a key here where you can select the various sensors you might be looking for on the map. The stations, where they're ghost stations, that one's still operational, but they've not been on for a little while. That one up here is being moved to a school, but the data is no longer live. But these stations that you see there, the data is live and they're fixed stations that are constantly updating so that you can see the most recent data. And I'm hoping that with this type of device, or any other type of device that is capable of feeding data into the system, because it's open to anybody to do that, who is going to follow the protocol that's needed to have it registered and appear on the map, as long as it's got GPS location information in it, is able to actually appear on that map, or on the map globally, in fact, anywhere in the world. Rolling over a station provides you with detailed information of the most recent count with GMT or a UTC time code to it, or time stamp on it, as you can see there. And as you move through, you can select the sensors that you're interested in, as I mentioned, and you can then see which have those temperature sensors associated with them. You have the ability on each station to see a drop-down of all the different channels that may be present, whether it's single gamma or whether it's multiple weather sensors or any other type of data, any other type of environmental data that people choose to upload to the system, which they're entirely at liberty to do that. It's there for others to use, and at present it is sitting on a server which is curiously run by Connection Software, who also do text messaging for the Metropolitan Police and provides a very secure and robust system. The opportunity to see a graph in detail by clicking on any one of these sensors gives you a detailed graph. That's giving you 10-minutely data, which can, let me take it to the next one. Okay, you can bring up multiple graphs, one above the other, and as you roll over the individual readings, you can see the actual measurement, in this case in nanograys. It need not be set up in that way. You can rearrange the graphs by using the up-down buttons. And if you have readings that go beyond the scale that is preset, then you can use this autofocus drop down with a menu down on the right hand side, where you can use autofocus to bring everything into view and see what the maximum and minimum readings on that graph are. And you can download the data from that graph in XML or CSV to drop into a spreadsheet. And if you have two sensors on it, which are wind direction and wind speed, you'll get the wind roses up, which allow you to slide the time slider, and you'll see the wind rose here actually indicating the direction at that point in time of the wind, and also the scale of that will be noted as well in terms of meters per second. And this one on the right, you can turn the sections on and off and see where the dominant winds are for a particular direction, or what the percentage of wind in that direction for that period of time. And you can set the period of time as well that you want to look at. Now that's another possibility. You can bring more graphs together so that you can stack up a few graphs in one view and do comparisons. And you'll notice that there is a slider below each graph, and they correspond in terms of the period of time that you're looking at. You can stretch and squeeze those sliders, and in doing so, all the others can correspond to that time period. And it allows you to go into detail and dive into the finer readings, or see them as they're presented over a broader time period, which can be up to 2 years, and you can select how far back you want to go. And there's data on the system at the moment that does go back to the early 2000s. We have other data going back to 1988, 87, 88, but it is in a different format and hasn't yet been translated to go onto the system, but it can go onto the system. We can move forward. There are a couple of things that are on the way. As you saw there, stations on the map provide will provide soon, it's already been written, it's just being tested, they will provide the facility to upload manual data that might be collected by hand-taken readings or occasional readings over a period of time. Environmental health officers in Northern Ireland who've been very supportive of the project, they've actually said to me, look, we want you to charge for what you're doing, because I tend to be I'm very reluctant to charge anybody for any of it. They've said, look, we like the idea, if you could display readings that have been taken this month, that month, and so on, we'd like to have a way of uploading that. And we've provided a spreadsheet template mechanism that allows you to cut and paste readings into it with the timestamps and the location, and it will appear on the map accordingly. And then you'll be able to graph that as well. And the other aspect of and that allows you to upload documents and images and reports that might be associated with that station. So even if you haven't got a fixed site station, you can actually still put that data online and have an icon appear on the map for that type of data. All of that entirely free, anybody can use it, they just have to apply for an ID and a password and meet the protocol which is in XML. And these databases can exist in multiple places and they can feed each other. It's designed so that we can have a duplicate occurring automatically in another country for security's sake. The other thing that I wanted to, well, let me just get to the next slide. Hold on, I've lost my cursor.
It's there.
Okay, thank you. Right. Okay, this gives you an idea of how the data can be stretched, and you can roll over and see the details. And when data is presented in yellow, it implies that a marker has been set for certain blocks of data against which you can then view the comment associated with it. And in this case, it's indicating that this was a gamma increase due to a rain event. So different things can be highlighted in that way. And then there's an example of two rain events. You can see the rain above, and you can see the gamma associated with it. These are in sync together. You can unlink one of them so that you can then move to another bit of data, hold all the rest in sync, and you can move through. So you can stack up as many graphs as you want. I think we've gone as far as 12, but I'm not sure that how it will perform if we go beyond that, but it should be okay. And you'll notice here the little slider at the bottom is just looking at a small amount of the data that's been selected. And as you move one along, so the others will move with it. Okay, I think that's pretty self-evident.
Sort of like a film of it.
It is, yes. You can delve into it and go back through time. It's like being able to rewind the film as well.
This looks like a video editor to me.
It does look like it, yes. And interestingly, you can click and drag across the data and it will stretch and reveal what you're looking at. Or you can use this to open it out as well, or you can close it up with this and move it along to look at different bits of the data. Now here's an event that's been highlighted, I pointed out before, in terms of time synchronization between the graphs and how the rainfall is being logged there against the gamma increase that you're seeing on the lower graph. Interesting, this one it's been using this drop-down menu to use the autofocus, as we've called it. It's a fellow who did the programming in Zimbabwe who came up with the term, and I thought, well, that's a good idea. So when you use the autofocus, it'll actually give you rather detailed, but it'll give you the maximum and minimum of that block of data, that period of time. And here we've got an example of data missing. The data's been collected, but that particular block of data is being marked out of the equation. But by clicking on the red triangle, the triangle, which will then go red, that data will appear in that position, and again you can look at why it's there by clicking on the comment when you roll over it. And here that's been for the purposes of a calibration check. Nope, not that. Let's see if I can get out of that now. There we go. And here, because that's going off the top of the graph, and we've actually gone right into the data here, so we're looking at a very small amount of an entire period of data from January 16. Difficult to say where it gets to there, I'm afraid, but September. So we're going from January to September, and we're just delving into that little bit of data for the detail of 1 hour or two. And as you see, the triangle's gone red, indicating you're looking for data which is apparently missing, but there's reason for it to be hidden. It was calibration data. The early part, well, we'll see when I go to the next slide, using autofocus to be able to bring it into view. And here it is. Autofocus has brought it into view, and you can see here is a low-level test that's been done on this particular station, which was Belfast, and that's where they've used a potassium sleeve over the probe to get an increased level to check it from time to time. And here they've used a cesium source, which I've not had anything to do with, fortunately. Okay, and you can go in and override the y-axis there, set it as you wish to view the data in detail. And there's another feature to this, which is the time-lapse display. So if you look at this bit here, and keep an eye on the colour of the icons in the next graph, or next presentation slide. It's telling you about this pod here again. Now we're looking at Northern Ireland. Omagh is off because they've done some building work and it's not been off for long. You'll see when it was on, in fact, in the next one. You can set the time period you want to look at, up to a month. And you'll notice there's a time slider here that will pop out. And this time slider gives you the period of time that we're looking at and what time in detail we're actually looking at that position on the time slider. Now this is jumping through because I haven't done it as a video, but you would be able to take that through smoothly, and we're actually adding buttons shortly to enable you to play it like a video. You could just press the button and it will slide through, and you'll see the consequences of that as this illustrates. Look at the colours of the icons as we go through. Whoops, go back one. That was the first colour. These icons are changing in colour according to the data at that point in time. So if you run the slider continuously, you will see it changing constantly as the readings fluctuate above and below the mean. And you notice this one in Omagh goes off on, well, roughly around the 31st or so of May, and wasn't running later on in May, in the same day. So that was the reason that it's appearing as a ghost station for that point in time.
Graham?
Yes?
We're sliding out of time ourselves.
Okay.
What, there are two things. How much does establishing such a station cost? What main contribution has the network been able to make? I mean, I can see its value, but
yes.
Is there a key issue that you've been able to highlight with this, or is there? I can see.
Yes, I can point out that the system as a whole has been to enable people to make judgments of the data, as has John been able to do with the graph that he's pointed out from the past. There are so many aspects over the years that have occurred. And I've stepped back from making any judgment of that data. I've left it for others to examine that data and make sense of it, yes.
There's what you haven't mentioned, that you can have an alarm setting.
That's right.
And that maybe is something that people see as very important.
Yes, the individual stations that are out there are in fact quite comprehensive computers, and they do allow you to preset an alarm when one of the parameters that it might be recording, be it gamma or more, can be set to above or below a particular level. And you can distribute that alarm to different people according to a contact list, who will also get a regular reading if they wish on a weekly or daily basis.
But it feed into the main centre, and if it was serious, it could warn everybody, couldn't it?
If it was set up to do that, yes, but it is down to the individuals to control how it behaves. I've stood clear of actually determining what should be seen as an alert level for anyone. But I better press on. I mean, one of the things about the colours of the sensors is that there is a range that is set. It is empirically set, and you can roll over and see what the band of readings is for any particular colour to appear. Yes?
I know that the little fart from Fukushima went around the world several times. Has anyone mined your data to see if there was an uptick in the UK detectable in the couple of weeks after Fukushima?
I have not seen anything, and I've not had anybody report that. As much as I was interested to try and find that myself.
You think it's sensitive enough that if you mine the data,
We
you
did
can
pick
find
up,
that?
just to answer that point, we did actually ask that question about Fukushima. We didn't pick anything up. We did pick up the business with that St. Petersburg one that went a bit odd.
Yes, on the St. Petersburg one, in fact, that was curious. In the outset, everyone seemed to be very suspicious of what we were doing from the official point of view. But the NRPB phoned me up early one morning and said, there's been an accident in St. Petersburg. You may be interested in looking at any data change, any readings that would increase because of that. Which was quite a relief in many respects, that they were respecting what we were doing. And then shortly after that, I'm not sure whether it was the same event, the Met Office contacted us and said, are you able to provide us with some high-resolution data in order to look at the weather events? And they gave us a back trajectory of the increase over a rain event that we did see. And we were, in the early 90s, instrumental in determining the standard by which the readings were being taken and the maintenance of the technology used to do that. Now, that was handled by the National Nuclear Company and the local authorities' radiation response, I can't remember what LARMAC stood for these days. But this, I'd like to just, before I come to an end, if I can rapidly go through this, this is rather odd. It happened to fall out in the in the choice of an acronym for the station that happened to match something. I don't even spell my name that way, but it was rather loosely termed the Graham Station. Now, this is the idea of quite a high resolution, very, very low cost probe that is now available, dare I say, on AliExpress. And we've mounted that entirely with, anybody can do this, with Velcro within this tub. It's a waterproof container with some equally Velcro fitted silica gel bags, and it gives it's got a good rubber seal, and a friend of mine tells me they use this when they go potholing for keeping all their goods dry, food and so on. And with a single cable gland, can be charged up, although this is still in its final, well, it's in its final stages of development and testing, and I've yet to sort of prove that it can do all it's meant to do, with an online available sort of a solar panel system that you can put to the back of a rucksack people use to charge phones when they're going up the mountains, if they've got communications, I guess. And this provides a facility, when it's complete, that means that once it's plugged in and once there's light and it's got enough energy to keep it going night and day from the daylight available, will automatically put the data on the map and keep it updated live. And I'll skip through this. I know we're running, I'm sorry we're running a bit late there. It is...
Half an hour, Graham, and it's now...
Okay,
Yeah.
More than twice.
I'll move on.
I should finish now.
Yeah, I'm going to show you on the site then. All this is detailed. There is a little video. I'm not going to run it then, but we are looking for one more piece to be completed, and I'm talking to somebody at the moment to write the code for it. That was the original drawing, and we reckon that this whole lot will come in at well under 250 quid if somebody wants to put one together or have it put together for them. You can send a note to GRAEMM at environment.org.uk in order to get more information as it becomes available. And for those that are technically interested, these are the specifications of the particular probe, and there are links to the specification documents for the actual coding that is needed at the moment. There's leaflets here if you haven't already got one, and it's got the address on there, and I can close that up. And thank you very much.
Are all your slides on that link?
Sorry?
Are your slides on that link?
I think if I come out of that, there is the station is, yes, this has the link to the stations, to the website is at monitoring.org, courtesy of John, who has that domain name and has given it to the project, or environment.org.uk takes you to a number of links for different regions, or you can go straight into the project, and here you can see the slide presentation. You can look at details about the pod, the gamma pod that's proposed now, and that concludes it. Thank you very much, folks. Thank you. Sorry to have taken so long.
Well, I think that's an amazing project that you set up so long ago, and I think it's going to come into its own again, particularly with the discussion we had earlier with Tim and putting little LEDs to monitor sources around.
Ours is much lower tech. But John, Graham, I did have a question for you. And I'm sure you've been doing this, but you know the Safecast group.
Oh yes. Yes, I think one of the goals here was to try and be reasonably providing the facility to delve into the data, to be able to compare between stations and lock in one event and compare it with others and see the relationship between them, and multiple sensors that anybody can just add freely as they choose.
So are you linked into the Safecast?
I want to be, and we've got an interface that would make that possible, but as yet this is still quite fresh.
Okay.
So I want to make a point here about the future of the project.
Yes.
What Graham has described is what you might call a descriptive system, but I think in the low-level radiation conference we also ought to consider focusing on particular projects. Now, one of the problems that Graham hasn't mentioned is failing finance for the whole network.
Oh yes, there's no money gone into it.
And I'm always into money, but Graham's, as you explained, is not into money. So the thing is that we really need to reinvigorate local authorities' interest in monitoring radiation levels within not just rural areas, but particularly in urban areas. And one of the possible things that I'd like to suggest, and we can discuss that either a copy or something, is that we know that the childhood leukemia rate within 600 metres of power lines is doubled. And we suspect this is due to an increase of the actual electromagnetic system power lines is focusing natural radiation. We don't know that, it's a hypothesis. And therefore, with this kind of amazing system that Graham has invented, if we were to focus on getting measurements within, we could measure inside the envelope of an electromagnetic system within an urban area and others under power lines, we may very well find, compared with control groups, that we have an increase in level of background radiation. Now that would be an extremely important thing to do, both politically but also from a scientific point of view, because there we will be showing a direct link between increases in background radiation and increases in childhood leukemia.
The work's been done by the man who was at Bristol, and he showed that the alpha particles were drawn towards power lines. I can't remember his name, I'll look it up for you.
Tony Hopwood?
No, it was a different name. And in, 1998, which was the first low-level radiation health conference, which was jointly held between the NRPB and Friends of the Earth, Alice Stewart brought up that very issue of natural background radiation and childhood leukemia. So it is there in the literature, and when I get home, which is not for another 10 days, I will find out the man who did the work at Bristol.
Is that Dennis?
It is Dennis.
Hmm.
What was his surname?
Begins with H.
Henshaw.
Henshaw.
There we are.
Oh yes. He did the teeth, didn't he? The alpha. Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
I'm afraid at this age you need at least 2 people in the room to get
Yes, yes. Oh, can I just say one thing? I'm looking for somebody to take over what I've been doing now. Because I would like to think that it could be somebody else's
Find the
responsibility.
hackers.
I think so. Yes. Thank you, Jill.